The ship had no windows on its lower deck, so Lyra made her own. She had taken a blue crayon and drawn a long rectangle on the wall beside her bunk. Inside it, she drew stars. Then she drew a dragon because she had heard the adults talking about dragons for 3 days straight and she wanted to know what one looked like. She gave it a crown. She gave it a frown. Her father, Delegate Orin, found her there when he came down to grab his briefing files. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the crayon dragon on the wall of the government ship, and then he sat down on the bunk beside her and put his face in his hands. "Lyra," he said, "we are 1 day from the draconian throne world." "I know," she said, "I drew it." She pointed at a small orange circle in the corner of her crayon window. "That's it, Drac something. Vorith Prime." "That's what I said." Orin looked at his daughter. She was 7 years old and she was wearing her school shoes because they were the only shoes she had brought. She had a box of 64 crayons in her lap, sorted by color in an order that made sense only to her. She had been inside his travel bag for 11 hours before anyone found her. By that point, they were already past the outer relay station, and turning back would have cost them the appointment. The appointment they could not miss. He had considered, briefly, sending a distress signal. Ambassador Sura had suggested it. Commander Bren had suggested locking Lyra in the storage bay. Orin had refused both. He had read enough history to know that canceling a submission ceremony was not seen as an inconvenience by the draconian hegemony. It was seen as a statement. 3 civilizations had made statements. None of them had a second chance to make another. So Lyra was here, on a diplomatic ship carrying humanity's greatest treasures, a gravity-folded stone containing the compressed record of all human history, a sealed vial of water from Earth's first ocean, 500 years of music played by a living orchestra in the forward hold, and also one child with 64 crayons and school shoes. Orin picked up his briefing files and looked at them without reading them. "You are going to stay in this room," he said. "During the ceremony you stay here. You do not come out. You do not talk to anyone. You do not draw on anything that belongs to the Draconians." "What do they look like?" Lyra asked. "Big." "How big?" "Their smallest guard is about the size of this ship." Lyra looked around the cabin. It was not a small cabin. She looked back at her crayon dragon on the wall and added a second, smaller figure next to it for scale. Then she made it smaller, then smaller again. "Are they mean?" she asked. Orin thought about this carefully. The Draconians were not mean the way a bully was mean. They were mean the way a glacier was mean, not because they wanted to hurt things, but because they were so large and old that the things they moved through simply did not survive the contact. Emperor Ravak had ruled for 4,000 years. He had received the offerings of 216 civilizations. He had destroyed 11. "They are very serious," Orin said. "They do not like noise. They do not like surprises. They do not like anything that is not part of the formal ceremony." "What's the ceremony?" "We give them gifts. They accept the gifts. We leave." "That sounds boring." "It is the most important thing humanity has ever done." Lyra considered this. Then she looked at her crayon box, selected a purple crayon, and began adding detail to the dragon's crown. "Does the Emperor have a lot of stuff already?" she asked. Orin thought about the reports. Ravak's treasury held 7 dead stars, the material wealth of 40 planets, 3 living ecosystems preserved under glass the size of continents, the genetic records of species no longer alive, art created by hands that had turned to dust 1,000 years ago. "Yes," Orin said, "he has a lot of stuff." "Then why does he want more?" Orin did not have an answer for that. He had read the briefings. He had memorized the protocols. He had practiced his bow in front of a mirror for 2 weeks. Nobody in any of the documents had asked that question. He left the cabin and went upstairs to meet with Sura and Bren. Behind him, Lyra looked at her crayon dragon with its crown and its frown, surrounded by all its stars, and she tilted her head. She had drawn it with everything, the crown, the throne, the stars all around it. And it still looked lonely. She picked up a black crayon and very carefully, she started a new drawing on a fresh piece of paper. She wanted to get a better look at it before she saw the real one. She wanted to understand what she was looking at. She drew a throne that took up half the page. She drew a dragon sitting on it, alone. She left a lot of empty space around it on purpose. Outside the ship, the stars were getting brighter as they moved deeper into draconian space. The delegation had 16 hours left. Sura was reviewing the gift manifest. Bren was running weapon-free confirmation checks for the 5th time. And Lyra was drawing, quietly, in the room where she was supposed to stay. Nobody had told Lyra how cold space was, so when the docking gate opened and the air from Vorith Prime came in, she pulled her jacket tighter and pressed her nose to the small observation slit in the side chamber wall. What she saw did not look like a place. It looked like a word she did not know yet. The Grand Hall of Ravek had not been built. It had been carved out of the cooling body of a dead star over 800 years by hands that did not get tired. The floor was black and veined with gold that was not decoration but actual compressed stellar matter, still faintly warm underfoot. The ceiling was so far above that clouds had formed near it, thin and gray, drifting slowly between the pillars that held the roof up. Each pillar was wider than a city block. Each one was carved with the record of a civilization that had come here before and offered itself. Some of the carvings near the bottom were very old and very detailed. Some of the carvings near the top were newer and had fewer lines. The delegation had been walked in by Drakvel, the Emperor's Chamberlain, a dragon roughly the size of a large building, who had looked at Lyra when they arrived and made a sound like a mountain shifting. Orin had explained, quietly and quickly, that she was his daughter, and that she would remain in the side chamber and cause no disruption whatsoever. Drakvel had stared at Orin for a long time. Then he had led them inside without another sound, which Sura had interpreted as permission, and Bren had interpreted as a threat. Now the ceremony was underway. From her slit in the wall, Lyra watched species after species walk forward across that impossible floor and present their offerings to the throne. She had expected a line. What she saw was more like a procession of the most unbelievable things she had ever or would ever see in her life, each one stranger and grander than the last. The Velmoth brought a bottled sun, an actual star, miniaturized and sealed in a sphere of compressed gravity, still burning, still alive. It lit up the entire hall when they carried it forward. The Quarith brought a planet, not a model of one. A real one, resculpted over 2 centuries into a perfect geometric shape, every mountain filed down, every ocean drained and refilled in patterns that formed a single piece of art visible only from space. They projected the image above the hall floor so Ravek could see it without traveling there. The Sen brought silence, a complete recording of a dead species' entire language, every word ever spoken, compressed into a single tone played once at a frequency only the Emperor could hear. Several smaller delegates fainted from the pressure. Each time the delegation leader bowed. Each time Ravek, who Lyra still had not properly seen yet, said the same word. Noted. That was all, just that one word. Not thank you, not impressive, not I will treasure this. Just noted in a voice that sounded like very slow thunder, and the species would bow again and move to the side and the next one would come forward. Lyra watched this from her slit in the wall for a long time. She had her paper on her knee and her crayons beside her, and she was drawing the whole time, but she was also thinking. She was 7, but she was the kind of 7 that paid attention to things adults had already stopped seeing. What she was seeing was this. Every single species that came forward looked terrified. They carried the greatest things they had ever made or found or grown, and they held them out with shaking hands, and they waited. And the emperor said noted, and they looked. She searched for the right word and found it deflated. Like they had been holding their breath for years, and had just let it out, and found that the air tasted like nothing. She had seen that face before. It was the face her father made when he worked for 2 weeks on a report, and his supervisor nodded once and moved on. She pressed her crayon to the paper harder. And then, for the first time, she saw the emperor clearly. Ravek moved from his throne when the Quarith projection filled the hall. He did not stand the way people stood. He unfolded. 4,000 years of existence did not move quickly. It arrived. One moment he was seated, and the next moment he was simply present in the center of the hall, and the light from the bottled sun caught the edges of his scales and turned them the color of cooling iron. He was not what she expected. She had expected a monster. What she saw was something much older than a monster. Monsters were angry. This was not angry. This was something that had finished being angry a very long time ago, and then had finished being surprised, and then had finished being pleased, and then had simply continued existing because that was what it did. He looked at the Quarith planet sculpture for exactly 4 seconds. Noted. Lyra looked down at her drawing. She had drawn him again. She had been drawing him for 16 hours now, this dragon with the crown and the frown on a throne too big even for him. She had drawn him a dozen different ways. In every version, the thing that kept coming out the same, no matter what she tried, was the space around him. All that empty space. She chewed the end of her crayon. Outside, her father was straightening his jacket. The human delegation was next. The walk across the grand hall floor was the longest of Orin's life. Not because of the distance, though the distance was considerable. Not because of the other species watching from the sides, though there were hundreds of them and many had eyes that did not blink. It was long because of the sound, or rather, the absence of it. The hall had a silence that pressed against the ears like deep water. Every footstep the human delegation made was swallowed by it immediately, leaving nothing. It was the kind of silence that had been here for centuries, and had learned to be comfortable with itself. Sura walked at the front. She had rehearsed this for 2 years. Her bow was measured at exactly the correct angle. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and formal and perfectly pitched for the space. She introduced humanity. She gave the names the protocol required. She listed the gifts in the order the committee had agreed upon 3 months ago in a room on Earth with fluorescent lights and a broken coffee machine. Then she presented the first gift. The gravity stone was the size of a fist. Inside it, compressed through a process that had taken 11 years to develop, was the entire recorded history of the human species. Every conflict, every building, every piece of art, every name that had ever been written down. 200,000 years of existence folded into a rock small enough to hold in one hand. The physics of it alone had required 3 new branches of mathematics. Sura held it forward on a cushion. Ravek looked at it for 3 seconds. Noted. She presented the ocean vial. Water from Earth's first sea, sealed 4 billion years ago in geological amber, and recovered by a drilling team who had spent 6 years on the project. The oldest water in the known human record, a connection to the moment life had begun. Ravek looked at it for 2 seconds. Noted. Then the music. The orchestra in the forward hold had been playing for an hour already, warming up, and now they began the piece that had been composed specifically for this moment. A work that moved through 500 years of human musical tradition in 40 minutes, from the oldest folk song recorded in any archive to something written last year by a composer in her 20s who had cried when she found out what it was for. The sound came through the hall's relay system and filled the impossible space, bouncing off the stellar matter floor and the cloud-level ceiling and the carved pillars. It was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most beautiful things humanity had ever made. Ravak waited for it to finish. Noted. Oren stood behind Sura and kept his face still. He had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that this might happen. He had read the historical records. He had seen the pattern. Every species brought the best thing it had, and the best thing was always something that could be held, or seen, or stored. Something that could be noted and placed alongside the other things that had been noted. The Draconians had been receiving offerings for 4,000 years. They had everything. They had the physical record of civilizations that no longer existed. There was nothing humanity could bring that the Emperor had not already received a version of. Sura was bowing. The formal part was complete. They would be assigned their status, the submission accepted, protection granted, file closed, and they would leave. Then Ravik spoke. Not the word, a different word. There is a small human in the side chamber, he said. It smells of wax and paper. The silence changed quality. It was still completely silent, but now it was the silence of a room full of creatures who had all stopped breathing at the same moment. Drakvel made a sharp, low sound. Sura went rigid. Bren's hand moved 6 centimeters toward a weapon he was not carrying and had not been allowed to bring. Oren felt something in his chest drop several floors. He stepped forward. That is my daughter, he said. She was not supposed to be on this ship. She hid in my travel bag. I apologize for the disruption. I will ensure she remains in the chamber. There was a pause that lasted long enough to become something other than a pause. How old? Ravik said. It was not a question in the usual sense. It had no rise at the end. It landed like a statement that expected to be answered. 7, Oren said. She has been drawing since we began. This was not a question either. Yes, Oren said, she draws a great deal. What has she been drawing? Oren opened his mouth, closed it. He did not know. He genuinely did not know because he had been in here and she had been in there, and he had not checked, and now the Dragon Emperor, the being who had destroyed 11 civilizations, who had received the genetic records of dead species without expression, who had watched a miniaturized sun be placed at his feet and said noted, was asking him what his 7-year-old daughter had been drawing in the side room for the past 3 hours. I believe, Oren said carefully, she has been drawing you. Another pause. Bring her, Ravik said. From the side of the hall, a senior Velmoth delegate leaned toward its companion and produced a sound that, translated, meant, the Emperor has not asked for anything in 200 years. Nobody disagreed. Lyra had not been told to walk slowly, so she didn't. She came through the side chamber door at her normal pace, which was the pace of someone who had somewhere to be, and had not yet learned that some rooms required a different kind of walking. She was holding a piece of paper in both hands, slightly crumpled at one corner because she had grabbed it quickly when the guard told her the Emperor wanted to see her. She had heard the Emperor wants to see you and thought, good, I wanted to show him this anyway. The hall was different from the observation slit. From there it had been a picture. From inside it was a weight. The floor stretched in every direction, and the pillars went up past the clouds, and there were hundreds of beings pressed to the walls watching her, creatures with too many eyes and not enough, creatures that did not have a shape she had a word for, creatures that had crossed the known galaxy to be here, and were now watching a child in school shoes walk across the floor of a dead star. Lyra looked at all of them once, then she looked at Ravik. She stopped walking about 3 meters from the throne. Not because she was afraid, because she wanted to look at him properly before she got any closer. She tilted her head to the left, then to the right, the way she did when she was checking if she had got a drawing right. Ravik watched this. You are the child, he said. You are the Emperor, she said. Behind her, Oren closed his eyes briefly. I have been told you were drawing, Ravik said. Yes, Lyra said. She looked down at the paper in her hands, smoothed the crumpled corner with her thumb and held it up. The drawing was in crayon, orange, purple, gray, and black with some yellow for the crown. It showed a dragon on an enormous throne. Around the throne on all sides were tiny objects, small suns, small planets, small boxes, small sculptures, a tiny recording disc. Things that were clearly meant to be all the gifts that had been presented today. They were drawn in careful detail for a 7-year-old. She had been watching through the slit for hours, and she had drawn each gift she could see. The dragon was in the middle of all of it. And all around the dragon, between the throne and the gifts and the pillars and the walls, Lyra had left the paper blank. Big empty spaces of nothing on all sides, the white of the paper showing through. And above the dragon's head, in uneven capital letters that pressed harder on some letters than others, she had written, "He has everything, but nobody stays to talk to him." The hall was completely silent. Ravek did not say noted. He did not say anything. He looked at the drawing the way he had not looked at the bottled sun, the way he had not looked at the planet sculpture, the way he had not looked at anything presented to him in longer than most species had existed. He looked at it with the full weight of 4,000 years aimed at one piece of paper held up by two small hands. Lyra held it steady. Her arms were getting a little tired, but she kept them up. After a while, Ravek said, "Why did you draw it like that?" Not a question. The same way he had spoken before, a statement expecting an answer. "Because that's what I saw," Lyra said, "when I was watching through the wall." "What did you see?" "I saw everyone bring you stuff and then leave." She lowered the drawing a little because her arms were definitely tired now. "Nobody talked to you. They just put things down and went away. You kept saying the same word. You didn't look happy about any of it." A pause. "I drew you a lot of different ways today," she said. "All the drawings looked the same. There was always lots of room around you. I don't know if that's what it feels like, but that's what it looked like from the wall." Ravek was quiet for a long time. The Velmoth delegate near the wall was now holding very still in the way that meant either deep respect or deep terror, and in their species, those two things presented identically. Drakvel had not moved in several minutes. Sura had stopped breathing in a way that was probably not sustainable. Then Ravek said, "Do you want to keep it?" Lyra looked at the drawing, then she looked at him. "I was going to put it on the fridge," she said. "At home. That's where I put my drawings, but you can have it if you want. I can make another one for the fridge." "I will take it," Ravek said. He reached out one hand. Lyra had heard the part about his treasure containing 7 dead stars. She had heard the part about 40 planets worth of wealth. She had heard about art made by hands that were dust now, and languages no one alive could speak anymore. His hand was the size of a car, and the claws at the end of it were each as long as she was tall. She walked forward and placed the drawing in his palm. He held it the way she held baby birds when she found them in the garden, carefully, with most of his attention going into not breaking the thing. Lyra watched him do this and nodded, satisfied, the way she did when she checked a drawing and found it was right. The antechamber Ravek led Orin into had no name on any official record. It was not a meeting room. It was not a throne room. It was simply a space off the main hall that the Emperor had walked into sometimes, across 4,000 years, when he wanted to be somewhere that was not the throne. It had no treasures in it, no compressed stars, no preserved ecosystems, no carved records of dead civilizations. It had stone walls and a floor worn smooth in one spot where something very large had stood for a very long time, looking at nothing. That was all. Ravek set the drawing carefully on a ledge of rock and turned to face Orin. Orin was standing straight because standing straight was the only thing between him and falling over. "The child," Ravek said, "Lyra." "Yes. She is well." It was not a question about whether she was currently healthy. Orin understood this. He answered it the right way. "She is," he said. She's well." She was not afraid of this hall. She has not yet learned to be afraid of the things she is supposed to be afraid of. Oren paused. She will, eventually. Most people do. Ravek was quiet for a moment. Most species do, he said. He moved to the worn spot on the floor and stood in it. It fit him exactly. He had been standing here off and on for a very long time. When I was young, he said and stopped. Oren waited. When I was young, Ravek said again, more slowly, like he was finding the words in a place he had not visited in some time. There was something that made me stop. The way the drawing made me stop. I do not remember what it was now. I have been trying to remember it since the child held up her paper. He looked at the drawing on the ledge. The crayon colors caught the faint light of the room. I believe it was something small, he said. Unimportant by any measure anyone would have used. It was not a star or a planet. I remember that much. How long ago? Oren asked. He was not sure he was allowed to ask questions, but he asked it anyway because it seemed like the kind of conversation where not asking would be worse. Before the hegemony, Ravek said. Before the first submission ceremony, before I had a title. He looked at the wall for a moment. I built the ceremony because every species that found me brought me things. I could not stop them. It seemed better to give the practice a structure, rules, a correct way to do it. He paused. At some point the structure became the point. I stopped expecting anything in the things they brought. When did that happen? Ravek considered. Around 1200 years ago, give or take a century. Oren let that sit for a moment. Lyra doesn't know how to give something the correct way, he said. She doesn't know there is a correct way. She just drew what she saw. Yes, Ravek said. That is what it was. He looked at the drawing again. She saw something true and she put it on paper and she held it up. No one has done that in a very long time. He turned to face Oren fully. Most species show me what they want me to see, what they believe will impress me. They bring me the largest or the oldest or the most expensive version of themselves. And Lyra brought you a crayon drawing. She brought me what she actually thought, Ravek said. About me, those are not the same thing. Oren nodded slowly. The human submission is accepted, Ravek said. Your species is recognized under hegemony protection. This will be formally recorded. Oren started to bow. Not for the stone, Ravek said. Not for the water or the music. Those were fine. Noted. He looked back at the drawing. A species that raises a child who walks into this hall and tells me I look lonely is a species I have not seen before. I have been watching civilizations for 4,000 years. I have not seen that before. Oren stayed still. She looked at me, Ravek said quietly, the way I used to look at things before I stopped. There was a long silence, not the pressing, ancient silence of the grand hall, a smaller one, almost a human-sized silence. She wants to draw another one, Oren said, because it was true and because he thought Ravek should probably know. She said she'd put this one on the fridge. She'll make another one for home. Ravek was quiet for several seconds. If she draws another, he said carefully, I would not object to receiving it. Oren looked at the emperor, 4,000 years old, ruler of the draconian hegemony, holder of dead stars and the records of lost species, standing in a worn patch of floor in a nameless room, looking at a drawing done in 64 crayon orange and purple and gray. I'll tell her, Oren said. Tell her, Ravek started again. Tell her she got the crown right. She drew it with more points than most representations use, the correct number. Oren looked at the drawing. Lyra had put 9 points on the crown. He had no idea how she knew that. He was not entirely sure she did know. Some things he was beginning to think she simply got right without knowing why. He bowed. This time Ravek did not stop him. It was a different kind of bow now, not the rehearsed angle from the protocol manual, measured for submission. Just a person bending forward in a room, out of something that was not fear at all. The ship left Voreth Prime on schedule, which surprised everyone except Lyra, who had fallen asleep on her bunk before they even cleared the outer gate, and did not wake up until they were 3 hours into open space. Oren sat beside her bunk for a while after she fell asleep. He looked at her crayon box, open on the floor, the colors all mixed up now because she had been using them in a hurry. He looked at the blank wall where her crayon window had been, Drakvel had, with visible discomfort, provided her with actual paper for the duration of the visit, so the walls were untouched. He picked up one of her discarded drawings from the floor, one of the early ones from the ship, Ravak on his throne, surrounded by empty space. She had drawn 12 versions of basically the same picture. In each one the throne got bigger and the dragon stayed the same size, and the space around it grew wider. He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. In the forward hold, the orchestra had finally stopped playing and was packing up instruments, talking in the low, tired voices of people who had done an important thing and were now very hungry. Bren was writing his security report and using language that his supervisor would probably ask him to revise. Sura was sitting in the diplomatic lounge staring at a wall and not speaking, which her aide had learned to interpret as a sign of either genius-level strategic thinking or complete mental absence. In this case, it was probably both. The formal acknowledgement came through 6 days later, while the ship was still in transit. It was a standard hegemony document. The submission accepted, the species designated as a protected civilization under Draconian Imperial Charter, all the formal language in all the correct places. Oren had read a dozen of these in his research. They were identical, template documents, noted and filed, one per species, stretching back millennia. This one had a second page. The second page was not standard. There was no record of any submission acknowledgement ever having a second page. The archivist who processed the file on the human end would later say that she had read it 4 times because she was certain she was misunderstanding it. She was not. The second page contained a single line, in formal draconian script. The Emperor requests that the human child Lyra be informed her drawing has been placed in the antechamber at her discretion. That was all. No further explanation. No political context. Just that one line in the language of a 4,000-year-old empire, filed alongside an official state document, sent through a channel used exclusively for matters of galactic governance. When Oren read it to Lyra, she nodded in a satisfied way and said, "I thought he would like it." Then she asked for fresh paper because she had already started the next one, and she was running out. The next drawing was posted to Voreth Prime 8 weeks after the delegation returned to Earth. Oren had not been sure of the correct diplomatic channel for mailing crayon artwork to the Dragon Emperor, so he had gone through the new official contact office that had opened quietly, with no announcement, between humanity and the Draconian hegemony. The first in recorded history to be opened at Ravak's initiative. The new drawing showed Ravak standing outside his throne room, looking up at a sky full of stars. He was not sitting this time. He was not on the throne. He was just standing, looking up. He looked less sad. Lyra had used more orange in this one. The response came back in 3 days. Not through the diplomatic channel. Through a private courier line that, according to the Hegemony Records Office, had not been used since Ravak sent a personal message to a deceased advisor roughly 900 years ago. The response was one sentence. "The Crown still has the correct number of points." Lyra read this and nodded again, the same satisfied nod. She pinned the message on her wall next to the copy she had kept of her first drawing. She had also made herself a copy of the second one for the fridge, which now had 2 emperor drawings on it and a multiplication test she had got full marks on. On Voreth Prime, in the antechamber off the Grand Hall, there was a ledge of smooth stone that had held nothing for as long as anyone now living could remember. It held 2 drawings now. The newer one had been set carefully beside the first one, and a faint scorch mark on the stone beside both of them suggested that Ravak had stood very close to them. For a long time, in the way he stood in the worn patch of floor. 6 months after the submission ceremony, a senior official of the Velmoth Collective filed a detailed intelligence report on humanity. It was thorough. It covered human military capability, which was limited, human territorial reach, which was modest, human technological development, which was promising but behind most species of comparable age. The last paragraph read as follows. Threat assessment minimal. Economic value moderate. Strategic significance unclear and likely understated. Recommend extended observation. This species gave the Emperor something no civilization in 4,000 years managed to provide. We have reviewed the records. We cannot identify what it was. Our analysts have described it variously as honesty, transparency, and the absence of performance. Our cultural division believes the correct word may be presence. Whatever it is, the Emperor noticed it. We suggest we pay very close attention to any species the Emperor notices. The report was classified and filed. On Earth, in a house with a fridge covered in drawings, Lyra was already working on the third one. She had decided this time she would draw him with someone else in the picture. She had not decided who yet. She was still thinking. She used the purple crayon first, because that was the color she always started with when she did not yet know what she was drawing. She trusted it to show her.